And we begin our engagement with God's Word with mice. Mice, a whole lot of mice. A few years ago, the National Institute of Mental Health conducted a fascinating experiment with a colony of mice. It all began with a 9-foot cage, 9 by 9 by 9, designed to house about 160 mice. The cage began with 8 mice in this cage, designed for 160. And after 2.5 years, these 8 mice had multiplied into how many number of mice? In 2.5 years, what do you think? 2,200 mice. So that's from 8 to 2,200 in 2.5 years. And the mice were given everything they needed, enough food, enough water, everything to live a happy, normal mice life. Researchers found out, though, after 2.5 years, that these mice became very unhappy with one another. You can only imagine, right? Mice formed into groups of about 12, and then they shunned everybody else. Male mice became passive. Female mice became more aggressive, and young mice, the little kid mice, they became more self-indulgent. Sounds a lot like people, right? At least at times. After 5 years in this crowded, populated, impersonal environment, what happened to all 2,200 mice? They died. They died. Every single mouse died. We know why, right? They became disconnected with one another. Their world became too impersonal. It became too crowded. So what's the point? The point is, you can guess, mice need each other. If mice are not significantly connected to other mice, they die. That's the point of the experiment. The point for us is much more invaluable. People, like mice, need relationships. People need connected relationships. People need life-giving relationships. And psychologists, counselors, and medical doctors tell us what? If we don't have significant life-giving relationships, then we, like the mice, die. It is a life and death issue. Why are we looking at this? Well, because we're in a sermon series on the gifts that God gives us the day we're baptized, like Clara Lane Thompson. When we are baptized, we become a new creation. And this isn't vague or abstract. No, it's very concrete. We get a new heart. We get a new mind. We get a new body. That's next week. But this weekend, we're looking at the gift God gives us in terms of new relationships. You get a new you when you're baptized. And that includes new, life-giving, connected relationships with other people. That's what Paul teaches in Ephesians chapter 4. There are 7 ones up here. What does that teach us? 7 being the perfect number in the Bible. We are united. We are connected to Jesus when we're baptized. We're also united and connected to one another. That's Paul's point here. Count the ones with me. Paul says there is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all. 7 ones, and it's all connected to baptism. When you are baptized, you get a new relationship with Jesus, and you get new relationships with people. There is a British newspaper a few years ago ran a contest. They wanted to find the best definition of a friend. That is to say, the best definition of people who connect in significant ways to other people. And some of the submissions are awesome. One was this: a friend walks in when the world walks out. It's pretty good. Another would be this: a friend understands my silence. Pretty good. Another prize-winning definition of a friend would be this: a friend multiplies joys and divides sorrows. But I've got, I think, a better definition of a friend. It's just one word. One word with 3 syllables, and I would say this is one of the most dynamic and memorable definitions of a friend you'll ever hear. Any guesses? 1 word, 3 syllables. You've heard it already several times in this worship service. What is a great definition of a friend? Jonathan. Jonathan. A Jonathan is one of the greatest definitions of what it looks like to connect in significant ways with other people. So let's take a look. Jonathan. Jonathan. We need a framework here, historical framework, so we can understand Jonathan and his friendship with David. Jonathan is the firstborn son of Israel's first king, and his name is Saul. And Saul reigned in Israel from 1021 BC to 1000 BC. Got it? Long time away in a faraway galaxy. So Saul reigns for 21 years, and he has a firstborn son named Jonathan. Jonathan is the heir to the kingdom. He's the firstborn. Don't forget that. Very important in this message this morning. And there's a guy who comes along whose name is David. David, the 8th born son of a man named Jesse. And David works for Jonathan's father Saul as Saul's singer and as Saul's fighter. And one day, everything changed in Israel. You know that story. It's high noon at the OK Corral. On one side would be the Israelites. On the other side, the dreaded uncircumcised Philistines. And the Philistines are trash-talking the Israelites, and the Israelites are shaking in their boots until a champion comes forth. David. And David is going to take on the Philistine giant over 9 feet tall, whose name you all know, and that would be Goliath. And David, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 47, makes a stunning claim. He says that the Lord does not fight with spear or with sword, but the battle belongs to the Lord. Oh, did it ever on that day. The battle belongs to the Lord. And David takes his slingshot. He's got 5 smooth stones. And he takes one of those stones and knocks Goliath flat on his back. David takes Goliath's sword and cuts the giant's head off. Whoa! And then there was a new song in town. Oh, it was the #1 song. They danced and sang. Why did they dance and sing? Saul has slain his thousands. Saul was a mighty warrior. But with David killing Goliath, the women are now saying David has slain his tens of thousands. Get it? That's the framework. Saul's the king, Jonathan is Saul's firstborn son, and now David is the new political hero in town. We go from the framework to the falling out. This song, Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands, that galled Saul. So Saul took to his Twitter account, right? And started tweeting all of these Twitters against his political enemy. Right? Wrong, but we do know someone who does that, right? No, Saul didn't take to his Twitter account. Saul had something better, and that would be a spear. Look at what the Bible says. David was playing the harp. Remember, David is in the court of Saul as the sweet singer of Israel and as a mighty warrior. And as he usually did, he was playing his harp. Saul had a spear in his hand. He hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David didn't elude the spear once, but twice. That's what I would call a relational falling out. You think, right? Oh, wow. Imagine someone with a spear in hand, and they're trying to pin you to the wall with that spear, not once or twice. We all know what this looks like. Maybe not the spear, but we all know about relational falling out. And it hurts. It's painful. It breaks our hearts. So we've gone from the framework to this massive falling out. Reminds me of Linus and Lucy. Talk about relational tension, right? Right there in the family. Charles Schulz once did a comic strip about Linus creating his own comic strip. And in the first section of the comic strip, Linus creates this really funny comic strip. And then in the next frame, he gives it to Lucy. And Lucy laughs. She thinks it's hilarious. Then she asks Linus in the next frame, who wrote this comic strip? And Linus puffed out his chest and said, I did. In the next frame, big sisters do this sometimes. In the next frame, Lucy crumpled it up, threw it on the ground, and said, well, in that case, I don't like it one single bit. And in the last frame of the comic strip, Linus says, classic words, Linus says, big sisters are the crabgrass in the lawn of life. If you were David, who would be the crabgrass in the lawn of your life? That would be King Saul with the spear 2 times. That's the falling out. We go to the friendship. The friendship. It says that Jonathan became one in spirit with David. This is a fascinating phrase. One in spirit. It's really a term that implies 2 cords, 2 strands, 2 ropes that are knit together as one. It says David and Jonathan became soulmates. They merged their lives. This is where we get the terminology in the hymn, blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. These words, becoming one in spirit, are used only one other time in the Old Testament, and you can look this up. It's in Genesis 44, verse 30. And in Genesis 44, verse 30, it describes Jacob and his affection for his son Benjamin. They too were one in spirit, so much so that Jacob says, if Benjamin dies, I die. That's a close-knit, heart-to-heart friendship and connection. And we all long for something like that. I don't care if you're 3 or 30 or 300. We are all hardwired to want to get connected to people. We want someone to share our values, value us, share our perspective. We all want to become one in spirit with other people, our spouses, our children, our grandchildren, people in this church. We have examples, right, in the media, like Batman and Robin. They were pretty close together, right? Where one went, the other went, and then a little before that would be the Lone Ranger and Tonto, right? But the problem with Batman and Robin and the Lone Ranger and Tonto is that one was superior and the other was inferior. David and Jonathan, they are on the same level. So a better and more contemporary analogy might be from Toy Story. Toy Story, right? And who are the best friends there? Cowboy Woody and Buzz Lightyear. And what does Buzz say? Famous words. To infinity and beyond. That's David and Jonathan. But there's more. It says in 1 Samuel 18, verse 3, Jonathan cut a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. It's not a contract. You know what a contract is? We do contracts all the time. Credit card contracts, legal contracts, mortgage contracts. It's a specific issue, and we sign it with ink. The phrase here is cut a covenant. In your English versions, it's always going to say make a covenant. That's not the best translation. The Hebrew word is karat. Trust me on this. Karat means cut, not make. Why am I making a big deal about this? A, I love Hebrew. B, I love you. And C, I just am dying for you to know about this. When you cut a covenant, something is cut, not signed. And what's cut? An animal in the Old Testament is cut. The throat is slit. The animal is dead. And what did that mean? It meant that I am willing to die for you. That's not a contract. No. That's a covenant that you cut in the Old Testament. And Jonathan is saying, David, I am ready to die for you. So what does it look like when we become one in spirit with someone? When we cut a covenant? Let's take a closer look at this friendship. It means that I sacrifice. I'm actually giving. And I do that joyfully. Joyfully. I can give, but sometimes it's not very joyful. Look what Jonathan does. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. If we're one in spirit, if we cut a covenant with someone, we are giving to them. And the most important feature that Jonathan gives to David is the robe. The robe. Now, not a bathrobe, right, or a pastor's robe. No, this was the robe to the kingdom. If you had this robe that Jonathan was wearing, that meant you were heir to the throne. Remember the framework? He's the firstborn son. He gets everything, the entire kingdom. And Jonathan says, I'm going to give it to you, David. And icing on the cake, I'm going to give you also my tunic, my sword, my bow, and my belt. Jonathan gives David everything. So who is God calling you to give to sacrifice joyfully? My hunch is you're sitting right next to him right now. Or maybe you're not. Maybe they're far away. What difference would it make if you gave joyfully? If you didn't hold back yourself? What difference would it make in the relationship? When will you do it? What's hampering you? And who said relationships were ever easy? I sacrifice joyfully. And in doing so, I'm prepared to give people everything, even the robe, to the kingdom. What else does friendship look like? Support, unconditionally. This is in 1 Samuel 20, where it says, Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do for you. Whatever. So this is what Jonathan does for David. Jonathan goes to his father Saul, who, remember, is not only his dad, but he's the king of the land. And Jonathan says to Saul, look, Dad, stop trying to pin David to the wall with a spear. David's done nothing wrong. In fact, David's on your side. He's a great singer, and by the way, he's a great fighter against the Philistines. Jonathan is ready to support unconditionally, even if it's going against the king of the land. In 1947, there's a baseball player who played at UCLA who was signed by Branch Rickey to be the first black man to play in the major leagues, Jackie Robinson. And in 1947, Jackie Robinson faced all kinds of hatred and racial slurs. Pitchers would aim for his head. And back in the day, in 1947, they didn't have batter's helmets. And a fastball to your head would kill you. People sliding in to second or third base would come in with high cleats trying to harm Jackie Robinson. In one particular game in Boston, against the Boston Braves, this is before they moved to Milwaukee, which is before they moved to Atlanta, there was a Boston Braves. And the Boston crowd and the Boston dugout, they were going over the top against Jackie. More racial slurs, more taunting, more fastballs at his head. Until a southern white man playing shortstop named Pee Wee Reese called a timeout. And Pee Wee Reese, also on the Brooklyn Dodgers, simply walked over to Jackie Robinson, put his arm around Jackie, and stood there for what seemed like years. His actions spoke louder than words. Pee Wee Reese was telling the world, this black man is my friend. By the way, these are 1955 Topps baseball cards, and I used to have both of those, but I sold them and gave them up for a friend. If you want to know more, talk to me after church. It's the real deal. Pee Wee Reese, kind of like Jonathan, sacrifice joyfully, support unconditionally. But then Jonathan died. You know that story, don't you? Jonathan is fighting, 1 Samuel chapter 31, he's fighting the dreaded Philistines again on Mount Gilboa, and Jonathan dies. And what does David do? David writes a song. Remember, he's the sweet singer of Israel. David writes this song, and he sings it in 2 Samuel 1. How the mighty have fallen in battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights, the heights of Mount Gilboa. I grieve for you, Jonathan, my brother. You were very dear to me. Your love for me was wonderful. God wants you to have relationships like that, to become one in spirit, to cut the covenant. But where do I get the willpower to do this? How can I live outside of myself? How can I begin to sacrifice and love and forgive and be humble? That would take another friendship, the best friendship. Jesus puts it this way: greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. Do you understand that Jonathan is a preview of Jesus? That we see Jonathan, and that is foreshadowing Jesus. Jesus doesn't make a contract with you. He didn't sign it in pen and ink. No, Jesus cuts a covenant for you, and it's signed, sealed, and delivered in his blood. This blood right here in Holy Communion. That's how much he cares for you. No wonder we sing the song, what a friend we have in Jesus. And remember, Jonathan gave up the robe. Oh, Jesus gave up everything too. And then some. He gave up the skin and muscle off his back on Good Friday. He gave up his life on the cross. He gave up the very presence of his Father as he cried out, my God, why have you abandoned me? Look at Jonathan. And you see Jesus. Jesus, who sacrifices joyfully. Jesus, who supports unconditionally. His love never fails. It never gives up. It never runs out for you. Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. And Jesus says, you are my friends. How many of you remember Carole King and her song about friendship? Anybody out there, baby boomers? Anybody remember this? There are 2.5 of you. Good, I'll take it. Remember this? Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you have to do is call. And I'll be there. Because you have a friend. Who does that sound like? Jonathan. Jonathan. And who gives me the power to live a life like that? Well, that would be Jesus.